CLG trying to come back and defend their championship title.
Well, we already see that matchup in the bot lane is going to get some bans to start. More Tom Kench has come out, and we'll see what kind of work TSM and CLG have done. Homework, that is.
Yeah, and one thing that's happened globally on the 6.15 patch is pretty much everyone, despite it being standard lanes all the time, has been going with the melee supports, except for Aframu, who played 3 Bard games and a Karma game in their quarterfinal victory. So very quickly, you can see TSM already targeting the Bard ban, and I wouldn't be surprised if Karma goes unbanned to see TSM pick it fairly early.
I actually am hoping for CLG to move towards those melee supports because Aframu looks his best when he's on a playmaking champion. There you go. They did ban out the Karma,
Yep.
but Aframu has been able to make a lot of plays for the team with the Bard. Now that that's gone, I expect him to go for maybe the Alistar or the Braum. Those are going to be the 2 supports probably traded in the matchup.
And a very bold pick by TSM right at the start, going for the Gangplank. With Gnar still on the table, I feel like Gnar is a very favorable matchup against the GP. It's also what Darshan played every single game of the quarterfinal.
I've been talking to a lot of top laners on this because there's a heavy debate on the GP and Gnar matchup. And, you know, some of them are, oh yeah, Gnar's so great because early on, you can push him in, you can try and dive him. And then the other school of thought is, yes, well, Gangplank, all he has to do is survive. You don't die, then you get to Gangplank go at bottom. And, you know, he plays so much more for the team. He scales really well late. So there are, you know, win conditions for both sides of that matchup, and it really depends on the players. And as you said, Darshan has really had a penchant for the Gnar side.
Yeah, and based on recent results from pretty much all the playoff series we've been seeing, it seems like it's a Gnar favored matchup in most games as far as victory goes, but we don't see scrims. We're seeing a very small percentage of those games.
And the other factor that does play into that matchup, obviously, is going to be the junglers. Gragas is picked up here, has been such a premier jungler, huge playmaking, and can, you know, facilitate those dives that the Gnar side would want to do on the Gangplank. Let's see what TSM will answer with.
I'm very surprised the Ashe has made it this far as well. Having the global ultimate already for Hanser leaves Ashe to be safe on the backline if they can give it a Braum or something as well with a pick. Right now, it's the Nidalee Hover and Bjergsen to pick for the team.
Yeah, we've seen no marksman bans this game. It was actually relatively targeted when they threw the Olaf ban in right at the very end there. So we end up seeing the standard junglers, and TSM is going to wait a little while longer, I think, to see if they want to go with the Ashe or the Jhin. It seems like Doublelift would be more in the favor of the Ashe, even though other teams are in favor of Jhin, just because Doublelift does like to be a little bit closer to the enemy team.
CLG be very telling of their composition. They already want to run in with the Sivir. What are they going to lock it to? We had that Gnar for Darshan pretty much pegged at the start of this champion select when it was not picked up by Hanser. So what will the rest be is the question.
Probably a support choice and then wait for the last pick to try and get Huhi a counter.
I love saving counter pick for Huhi for Counter Logic game because he has been one of the mid laners with the most diverse champion pool. This was one of the guys to first pick up Aurelion Sol when he was released. First put in a lot of time on him, and roaming has been such a big part of mid lane. Taliyah, though, we've been seeing Taliyah first picked all across the world in playoffs in many different regions, and she's dropped so far down the list, makes me think that CLG do have a counter pick specifically for the Taliyah, because they know that Bjergsen does play it and has put in a lot of time on it.
Yeah, the bans left a lot open, actually. We see it. The mid really wasn't hit for either side too much. That Karma's there, but it left up what's going to provide a good game.
I do like the boldness from TSM to blind pick Cassiopeia, because a lot of people, you know, are very hesitant to do that due to you know, assassins or something like that. But Cassiopeia has been Huhi's main weakness. We've seen him get solo killed by the champion by a couple different mid laners piloting the champion, and that has been something that he has struggled with. You know, not really giving enough respect to the chase down potential that Cassiopeia has. And sometimes, you know, the Cassiopeia will turn around ganks on him. So I'm very curious as to what they decide to go with here, because this has been one of his personal demons he's been battling with.
Yeah, and the counter pick up, he has played 2 Victor games, a Cinder game, and an Aurelion Sol game so far on the 6.15 patch. We were talking about Taliyah. He hovered it. Unfortunately, we have a bit of a spectator bug, but it looks like he's going with Aurelion Sol. So that's yet another one of those picks we say about his deep champion pool. Fly played it over in Korea for KT, and it synergizes quite well with the Sivir, and that's what CLG found success with in the 4th game of their quarterfinal matchup.
So much speed here for the CLG team, and they're going to need it because there's a lot of damage on TSM and a lot of long-range abilities here to pick off the back line there. Gangplank ultimate, Jhin ultimate, and the pillars from Biofrost. He's just going to try and use those pillars to get people into position so that they can land these long-range shots.
And I feel like the Aurelion Sol starts to work more even for CLG with the way the lanes work. There's not as much really action coming to everybody's ganking the side lanes, and he's been able to just farm, go back, continue to fly back to lane, farm and push it in.
So many of the top mid laners right now have been talking about how mid lane's all about wave control and turning it into roams.
Right.
Cassiopeia, one of the reasons she's kind of fallen off recently, doesn't have the same roaming threats, especially since she usually does take that ghost for extra teamfight mobility.
Yeah, and to me, that just tells me that Bjergsen's very confident in his ability to actually win lane. Like, not even have this be a farm matchup, but actually kill Huhi with himself or with the gank. And if they do that, that does open up the whole map, even if it's not a farm, clear, and roam strat.
You know the drill. This is where you get to participate more than just watching. As we load onto the Rift, let us know which team you are supporting by tweeting and using the hashtag TSMWin or the hashtag CLGWin. Man, everybody is ready. Are you? Because we know this one's going to be close. Let those team colors fly, and we'll check in with the votes in just a bit. The chants are starting. The Rift is opening up. Counter Logic Gaming versus Team Solo Mid is on the Rift.
Yeah, and last week when CLG played in the playoffs, they brought out some new picks which were unique to them in the playoffs with a Syndra in the mid lane and an Olaf in the jungle. This is actually Doublelift's first Jhin game of the split. So no Jhin in the regular season, brings it out in the first game of playoffs. I love the synergy Jhin has with Gangplank specifically post level 6 because the GP ultimate can come down followed by the Jhin W, and that can set up a lot of picks. We'll see if TSM try to utilize that in the mid game.
Yeah, even earlier on though, if we do look at that bottom lane, I'm a little bit worried for the TSM squad because Sivir plus Soraka has so much control over the minion wave. All they have to do is mindlessly shove the wave. Early wave control is even more important now on 615 with the first turret gold, and we've seen so many teams turn early wave control into extra gold for snowballing with the first turret, and Aphromoo has gone once again to one of those range supports for an extra advantage versus the Trundle lane.
And speaking of the range supports for CLG, this is something they're very confident and comfortable and maybe even stubborn in continuing to do because they were playing the range supports in the Spring Split playoffs. They brought the range supports to the Mid-Season Invitational, and they were beating the international mid lanes by 20 and 30 CS apiece. So much so that those other teams were thinking, you know what? You have to do it if it's a setup lane.
Actually close to the teams they were running at the Mid-Season Invitational.
And then no one else is doing it anymore, but CLG still is.
I like that CLG have a reason for doing it though. Okay, let's take a look at the action first here. Huhi and Bjergsen, as I said in the Champion Select, like this has been one of Huhi's personal demons. They talked about it in the video. You know, he struggled sometimes with, getting a lot of criticism, and most of the criticism is due to solo deaths or got played by the enemy mid laner. But
Hit it, Huhi. Just get one. Just one.
There you go. At least his time wasn't completely wasted there. He's going to get back in time before the melee dies. So this is a strategy why most of the mid laners have been talking about. It's all about mid lane wave control into roaming. Taliyah does the exact same thing. You push the first wave, move up, try and steal away from the enemy jungle. You also leave behind a trinket ward, which will help you keep track of Svenskeren, because that is going to be another very important matchup as Smithy is going to try and clear out his red quadrant and get to level 3 on Gragas.
Nicely hit. I was going to say, Bjergsen actually took that first engage quite well. Usually you just take stars upside the head and you're kind of pushed out of lane. The other person doesn't fight back that much.
Bjergsen definitely ready for it. We do have to note that Huhi has a bit of a sustained advantage in this lane, starting with the Corrupting Potion. And since he's Aurelion Sol, he can just fly back to lane now that he's level 3. I wouldn't be surprised to see a very early recall from Huhi. There he goes, and he's just going to continue to try and shove Bjergsen in. And the breaker of that lane will be if Bjergsen can actually pressure him out before he has that E cooldown.
And one actually adaptation that Huhi's made, since MSI, is not using his E to actually get back to lane. He walks back to lane after that first buy and then tries to roam with it later on, so he doesn't use the cooldown there. Coming back to lane, and the side lanes do have to watch out because as I thought the Sivir Soraka lane was going to be perma shoving under the turret there, down bottom, Doublelift and Biofrost actually have it move right up into the middle of the lane. And we'll see if the junglers make anything happen, because currently Svenskaren's topside counter jungling. He might go for a top lane gank there, which would signify to CLG that they would have more control over bottom lane. But as of right now, Sven has not shown himself up top.
I'm really curious where Svenskeren decides to go, because he doesn't quite have eyes on Xmithy, and the counter gank would be a possibility. This should see him, though. Darshan's going to have to be pretty creative in his escape here.
You can't hop onto Rek'Sai. Yep.
Oh, no. Well, you could try to. Definitely going to get pushed out of lane on that.
You can hop on him, not off of him.
There we go. You don't get the double jump because he knocks you up. That's a pretty big pressure advantage right there. It's going to allow Haunter to not fall behind in this critical matchup, although Darshan does go double thorns, and now Xmithy tries with natural response. TSM already there to stop him.
Yeah, I mean, he's trying to harass him on this Krug to make sure he doesn't get it. Smithy's waiting for the smite right now, by the way. Smithy knows that this is the right play, because obviously the numbers up on the top side of the map.
Oh, that's the roam!
Here comes Suhi. They're actually low on mana to get this going in. He takes so much damage from the outside. First blood to Aphromoo, and nobody takes the aggro to get taken down by the turret.
We talk about CLG's map play right there, and that's a perfect example. It wasn't a lane swap, but it was a very strategic roam play. Xmithy was down there being harassed by the support, which meant Doublelift was isolated on the turret, which meant Huhi came in, and it all works at the same time.
All of the little things we set up, the Huhi roam, the Smithy counter jungle, they all came to fruition at the same time here for CLG, and it's a very easy dive for that first blood. Huhi saved his E, he used it to go roam instead, and they just capitalized very quickly there on Svenskeren showing top, and all that TSM got out of it was the top flash.
Yeah, the icing on the cake for CLG is that Haunter completed his teleport down bottom, which means he has to go all the way back to base and run all the way back to lane, essentially invalidating the pressure advantage that Svenskeren gave him earlier with the gank onto Darshan.
Because usually what he's going to give up is a huge amount of minions. As of right now, actually, there is a huge amount of minions, and Haunter will get back to lane in time for this wave to crash. The thing is, whenever a big wave builds, you have to worry about what's the enemy team going to do to try and deny it to you, and Smithy's getting in with early wards.
Have CLG going for that early 5-minute top lane push. TSM sent Biofrost early and have opted to keep Doublelift farming solo. The question is, can they hold this, and is CLG going to try and dive?
CLG playing the map like they've almost lane swapped it. They said, you know what, turrets can still be in the same spot, we just won't lane swap. We'll rotate as much as we used to anyway. And they continue to put pressure on the top just before the bottom side of the map. Doublelift trying to retaliate now with a little bit of pressure.
And TSM with a pretty easy read there for the top play. However, no wards for Doublelift, and he is very far up at the turret. This is a level 6 Aurelion Sol, though.
Pulls off for now.
Smart of Doublelift to pull off right there. And just because people aren't lane swapping early doesn't mean they can't still lane swap later. As soon as the fortification is gone from the top lane turret, CLG has been very disciplined about going up there as soon as possible.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not a very complicated strategy, right? So TSM able to read it there, see the possibility, and they got the defense in place. TSM are actually slightly ahead in gold, even though they gave up that first blood. So they have been able to control the minions. They have been able to recoup a lot of those losses that they suffered in the dive.
Definitely seems like CLG was kind of setting themselves up. Looking back at that play, we wondered, why isn't the Sivir pushing out? Why is it so slow? They had a huge wave when they were able to dive Doublelift under that turret. So it almost just says, hey, we'll set up this wave. McSmithy's going to be in the jungle. Maybe at that time we have Huhi as well. And they got the 4-man dive on bot lane. Not something we've really seen from CLG lately. So as they said, continuing to evolve and continue to get better towards this playoff.
Yeah, and in this pause, TSM has paused because of a suspected bug on CLG, so they're actually investigating that right now. But I do want to talk about the gold distribution that Kobe was touching on a little bit earlier, and how it is a little bit unlucky that Aphromoo did get that first blood, since both of CLG's solo lanes are already down in gold. Substantially show for Darshan, actually. He's 400 gold down onto Haunter, and that is a matchup that is very snowbally if Gnar can get ahead and get an early Frozen Mallet. But if he doesn't get there, he actually loses that advantage.
Yeah, and that's why it was so important that both teams focused on that big minion wave as an objective in itself. And they both sent, 4 members of their team up to the top side. Because TSM got their defense in place, so much of that gold picked up by Haunter. And obviously, Gangplank does get that bonus gold because Haunter got most of the last hits with his barrel on the Q proc. So that's where a lot of that extra gold is coming in for TSM. Exactly where you want the Gangplank to be. We've been touching on that Gnar Gangplank matchup so heavily. And it's getting to the stages where Hansar now does have the ultimate and he can affect the rest of the map.
Exactly. Darshan's teleport is still down. There is a reason that people are still willing to pick GP into Gnar. They don't just watch another region and be like, that guy didn't do it. Like, there's experience for these teams that shows the GP beating the Gnar. Whether or not that is going to be proven false in the future, we don't necessarily know yet, but we do know that it swings both ways. And I think the biggest reason for that is how swingy a Frozen Mallet Gnar can be. If Gnar gets to Frozen Mallet before you can defend him and you're in a long lane, he will chase you down and kill you over and over again. But if you can deny him to a point where he's squishy for going to that Frozen Mallet and you can kill him a bunch, whether it's ganks or out farming, then it can swing in Gank Smike's favor.
Right. Get a few ganks in there, make sure you don't get Hansar under level for staying in lane too long, and that's kind of what they did. They popped Darshan once, gave Hansar a bit of an advantage, and they've left him alone.
It is just completely different strengths. Gangplank looking to scale, affect the rest of the map.
Yeah.
Gnar looking to chase you down and get early kills. The early kills have not come through, so Gangplank definitely sitting pretty here. It looks like they have cleaned up all the suspicions, and we'll get back into the game.
Right down to the mid lane is where we will drop back in. Pretty even on this CS after we saw a bit of a scuffle back and forth. He waiting on his exhaust to come back up if they were to go back and forth. No real kill pressure there, so should just be he's roam still. We can already see that happening now. Power in numbers. The CLG keeps the early game in movement.
And vision is going to be incredibly important in this game because the first turret is put at such a premium for both these teams. Where will the supports and the ADs go, and who can get the first big unanswered push on a turret? That's going to mean first turret and a big advantage, and vision is what sets that up.
Look at all the focus mid lane here for CLG. They're prepping a dive. He just went for a trade, got the Thunderlord's proc, and got him down to half life. But that ward right there is going to ruin all of CLG's plans, and Brierson will just play safe. So everyone returns to lane. How many minions will Darshan miss? I believe at least one melee.
Yeah, and this is actually really interesting to watch. Darshan is bottom lane at level 6, nearing Mega Gnar. His turret has more health, and the push top lane is pretty relentless by Stixxay and Afro. I'd almost imagine Hansar's going to have to use his ultimate to clear that way.
You don't say.
There is a possibility, how hard do you want to all in on getting that first turret? Where Darshan could have teleported on one of those minions to try and burst it down, but they didn't go for it. Now the bottom lane's going to lose.
Mega Gnar out soon. The pressure is just to get the turret. And Hansar being able to delay this one would be pretty good. Go ahead and throw him off. The exhaust is actually pulled out as well, so Darshan gets a bit of success for himself there. The roam from who he is just on the outside here. He's going to have to throw this at an angle. He won't be able to follow. He throws it too far behind. And TSM is going to have to blow flashes, but they get out safely and still trade that turret.
He still gets 3 flashes.
Yeah.
So this is actually...
it works out.
Not to mention the turret is traded in the top side. So that's a play that's good, but not great for TSM, since they did split the gold amongst 3 members, and there's no massive dump of 650 gold into Double's pocket.
See actually how that went. About 15 right now for Stixxay to spend, as they did that on the top side and gave him a little bit more. CLG trying to keep the pressure on. It's what they need to do for TSM's early game. They have one of the best.
Yeah, and CLG so far playing a little bit conservatively there. Not willing to risk too much on the first tower race, going for that early gold to try and snowball. Take the defensive play. We'll just take a couple flashes, and we'll let you have that small amount of extra gold that they get for the first turret. Now, the crucial thing will be to watch, can CLG actually punish TSM for those flashes? They have to keep the timer on all 3 of those. The bottom lane, very vulnerable. This is a Jhin, no self-escapes. Now he has no flash, so it's a perfect target for both Huhi as well as jungle pressure from Smithy.
Yeah, teams talk about how because top laners have teleport and mid lane is so roam focused, the center of the team is actually the AD. So when the AD and support have no flashes, it sets up a lot of opportunity, especially when you have a Gragas with flash. Although the attention for CLG looks to be elsewhere. Oh, nice juke.
Hansar says, no thank you, I drink responsibly. Oh, it's going to be the start call. Not start call, but Huhi calling the stars, I should say, to take down Hansar. And it looks like they're going to be able to get that one.
Yeah, CLG just take the opportunity that presents itself to them. Yeah, there's no flashes for the dual lane, but top lane is really pushed very far. Now we're in a situation where TSM are shoving mid and bottom, and they can collapse onto this first Cloud Drake here and take the Drake as the price to pay for Hanser's death.
And the interesting thing about this game is while CLG is the ones dancing around and making all the flashy plays, TSM are actually the ones that are winning the game. They're up by 500 gold, plus they're going to be able to pick up the first Cloud Drake uncontested.
Going to the mysteries. TSM kind of eludes all the danger that hits them. They got out of that with Flash, leaves everybody up to be strong enough to get this dragon. Well, they do lose pressure on the top side. Like you said, up in gold, usually in the regular season, up around 1,600 in gold.
Look at the importance of this Gangplank ultimate for clearing out waves. CLG setting up a deep dive, and now they're caught.
Nice silence by Aframu, seeing that out.
They still have Bjergsen coming to cut him off, though. Oh, good barrel slow right there.
This game is keeping you anxious right now, and even more so.
You were speaking of being anxious.
Oh,
man.
my
Let's calm down there a little bit.
It's like CLG is moving around all antsy, but it's a with method to their madness. They know what they're doing. It's like they can't sit in lane for more than a minute and a half, and they say, we have to roam. We have to go do something, create more pressure. And they've been quite successful. Like we said, still behind in gold, but they're setting themselves up to catapult pretty hard here.
They're teasing us. Every time we start getting amped up and ready to go, pause, calm back down. Amp you up again? All right, this time it's actually a Bjergsen issue.
Yeah, so Bjergsen is complaining about the same bug, and it's apparently a visual bug of Aurelion Sol's passive. So he said he was going to play through it, and if it happens again, they were going to pause again. And so to speak, it has happened again, so we were paused again, and they're currently working on a solution. Or thinking about a solution. One of the two.
As of right now, CLG have made their escape, by the way, from that tense situation. So the pause came after CLG exited the base, going for that very risky dive, honestly. They keep focusing on Hanser, and I have to say, especially taking into account the recent playoff games that we've seen across the world on everyone focusing on this Gangplank, one of the biggest strengths is dealing with a bunch of pressure. The wave clear with the barrel chains and with the ultimate specifically has saved them a couple times, clearing out crucial minion waves to earn advantages. You talk about TSM winning the game so far. That first turret gold was very big in getting them this little gold advantage, and clearing out that wave here on the top side again kind of earned them, extra pressure to get that Drake as well. So a lot of the objectives are from soaking up a lot of pressure and focusing on the minions. People really underestimate the gold that comes from the minion waves, and that is really how you play this game in the early stages. It's more of a chess game, working around which minion wave you can actually clear to get an objective.
Yeah, and CLG, even if we think back to the spring split playoffs, have beaten TSM by kind of enforcing their game style onto TSM. In the spring, it was 1-3-1. Currently, it just seems like as much map play as possible. And it's funny that we saw the Huhi feature before now, where Aframu and Xmithy were talking about how they had to tell Huhi, no, just win your lane, let's get some wards. He has been roaming so much. He is down 24 CS to Bjergsen. He's helping others, but it's hard to say whether or not it's actually working because the game is so close right now.
I do like it. Definitely got to play to your strengths. He's on a roaming champion. Go for the roams.
Well, a lot of those roams we've seen have been with Aframu side by side as they make their way, clearing out wards. So he's still kind of keeping him in there. He's got that little leash on him, saying, nope, can't go that far. And it's been coming up very strong for him. Already 2 assists for Huhi. Aframu did pick up that first blood, but they were still able to get a kill over to Stixxay. So the bot lane matchup coming out in CLG's favor to start this one off. We wondered how it would play out as Aframu goes back to the range champions. And now we're 11 minutes in. Second pause, trying to figure this one out here. But as I was saying right before we hit this pause, TSM on average of 1,600 plus gold at 15 minutes. CLG's regular season was -7, so basically even with the other team. Imagine having that every game, and that's why you are #1 in the league. CLG, however, has basically been able to stave that off this time and can probably get themselves a really good mid game here.
I actually do like the way that both teams are playing this. Both teams are playing, to their strengths. They're trying to have the Gangplank absorb, play, around the ultimate and focus on the objectives. And CLG are trying to play their roaming strengths here. The thing is, another really cool stat that we did collect is the amount of deaths pre-15 minutes where a player has died by themselves, basically these solo deaths. And CLG have the #1 solo desk as AD carry, the #1 solo desk as mid laner, and the #1 solo desk for a top laner. So
Or Smithy, dude.
a lot, yeah, exactly. All of the lanes for CLG,
Jungler, please.
they have the most solo desks, by themselves. So this is really a team where it's just like your ranked queue games where you're like, please group up and stop getting picked off and dying. TSM actually have a lot of pick here with the Gangplank ult and the Jhin. They might actually try and punish that weakness of CLG.
All right, while the referees take a moment to assess the situation on Bjergsen's computer, we are going to go ahead and send it over to the analyst desk.
Thank you very much, Riv. An unfortunate visual bug stalling us out here for just a moment, but it's going to give us a unique opportunity to kind of put the early game, this very early game, under a microscope from both of these teams. We did have a lot of questions about how TSM is going to play around first turret. What's the practice been like for them in their 2 weeks, considering that bye week, and how will they stack up against CLG here? They do manage to actually secure the first blood turret this time around. Before we dive into the gameplay, though, let's talk champ select. Aurelion Sol coming out in game 1 out of Huhi as a response to the Cassiopeia.
I think you have to know this is coming as TSM. They were probably preparing to play against the Aurelion Sol. I think when you look at their bans, you think maybe they could have fitted in there instead of one of the other ones, but I think they were trying to limit like the early game options. I know Aurelion Sol does have those, but they'd want to keep it off Smithy with the Olaf or something like that. So I can respect going for more targeted bans at other people.
I think the biggest surprise for me for TSM's draft is the fact that they're running a composition that doesn't involve a whole lot of diving and a whole lot of just go buttons. You don't really have a whole lot of tools. You have the Gangplank to kind of scale and stall out the game, but the most part, the biggest tanks are just Rek'Sai and the Trundle,
right? And
your engage is basically double his ult and his root, which is not something that we've seen before, as he usually takes either the Ashe, the Sivir, or the Lucian. And, it's a little bit iffy because that kind of composition revolves so much around the objective and as well as having the opponent run into you. But luckily, CLG picks the exact same thing,
right,
to run into you.
I think it's very interesting, too, because I actually like CLG's draft a little more. I think it falls off a little bit in the late game because Aurelion Sol, a lot of people say,
Sivir never falls.
Sivir, no, but Aurelion Sol definitely does fall off. And I think they have like a lot of speed ups, they have a lot of engaged dive tools early, and so I think you've already seen that they've been able to use that pretty well, and it seems like a pretty well practiced comp for them. And I really like the fact that we're seeing this game 1 because it's going to change TSM's bans, assuming they can stay on the track where they're making some plays.
Well, we've put a spotlight on the mid lane through the past couple series and talking about the importance of roams, getting those champions that have the ability to leave the mid lane throughout the early game. That's exactly what CLG does here. We have that early push forward from Huhi to get that back at level 3, have a little bit of extra power under his belt, and then that roam to the bot lane. 4:30 into the game, you've got a level 4 Aurelion Sol visiting along with a Gragas for a 4-man dive on a double lift. That's a big pickup for them, to get that first blood down into that bot lane.
And the critical thing about that was Hui's decision-making to save his E, to not use it to get back into the lane. You save it for the actual roam. So it's long communicated, hey, we're looking to make a play towards the bottom side of the map. We know it's been scaring us on the top side. We have Smithy down here. And the second that Biofrost separates, they see double lift on his own in that minion wave. And the silence from Soraka just makes this all too easy. A nice little dive. And you get the TP out from GP, which just gives you basically nullifies the lane in the top side.
Now, we haven't talked too much about that top lane matchup. Once again, we're seeing the GP into the Gnar, so TSM prioritizing that GP very heavily with the first pick here. But he played the lane quite well in terms of farm. We saw a pretty big gold advantage out of Hanser just due to farm in those first early levels, in part because he was able to shove a wave into turret top and then TP down and catch that wave that double have then missed. But definitely, as of right now, in the current game state, Hanser is finding the gold where he needs.
Right, and I think one thing that was interesting was CLG went for their kind of almost patented at this point flip to the top side, but the Aurelion Sol didn't join them, so TSM was actually able to hold on with 3, and it shows that TSM is a team that they're not flustered. They were prepared for CLG's strategy. We know, like I said, they know they're giving up the Aurelion Sol. They're probably okay understanding that something's going to come from this Aurelion Sol pick early, and I think that they're in a decent spot given that they should outscale pretty hard.
I'm glad you brought that point up where CLG roams towards the top side, trying to make that, I guess, patented 5-man push toward, or 4-man push for the top turret, but it was a bit disappointing to see them get pigeonholed into, hey, Gangplank has amazing wave clear. You can't just take this turret, and even though they're the ones that made the first move to the top side, TSM find themselves giving double lift, that solo farm, that solo XP to the bot side, and eventually is able to take that first turret over CLG, who are the ones making the first move.
Well, and that's where I think we return to Mark's point about the fact that they did do this patented swap, if we're going to call it that, but they really only did it with 2 people. They had Soraka, Sivir hard pushing that top lane, the 2 of them against the GP, while Darshan was attempting to defend. But of the two junglers, Sven was the one who showed up to actually pressure the turret, while GP was able to use his ult to clear waves and stave off the aggression just long enough for that first turret gold.
Right. Well, the initial swap right away, I think CLG, if they had brought Aurelion Sol, need to go for a dive. So that's what makes competitive top tier League of Legends so hard, is that there's so many little variables you need to understand are different. Versus a Rumble and a GP, you really need to dive him. You can't just push the wave in, you need to kill him.
Yeah.
Because otherwise he's gonna wave clear.
Speaking of little variables to that, usually when you see that play work, it all depends on the back timings of the dual lane. So if you have a different back timing, so CLG maybe recalls while TSM is in lane, they can easily surprise the top side. But because they made that play in the bottom side a couple minutes earlier, TSM, Double Lift was already dead, so he goes straight to the bottom. But Biofrost, he's got a lot of free time. He just recalled at the same time the CLG did, so he's able to respond to these plays.
Right.
And they have multiple people right on time. So you see him wetting the tri-brush while CLG is getting up there, which makes that play that much harder for them to pull off. So maybe a little bit too tunnel vision onto the plan and not onto the adaptation.
And unfortunately for CLG, you've got a Gnar defending who does not have GP level wave clears, so he doesn't have the ability to stack up against them. Now, what I do want to touch on as a result, though, of this first blood turret is the fact that it didn't go to any one specific person. Because, once again, we see two teams locked in a race for that first turret gold, we're not seeing 650 spike onto one individual. So if we return to our earlier conversation today about how important is first turret really, and where does it matter the most, we are seeing an example of where the gold being distributed as it is probably isn't going to mean the make or break point of an item spike for a TSM member.
And I think you could even argue that it would have been great to get it onto Darshan. He's probably the most important person in this single matchup here, where if he gets far enough ahead of the GP, he can kind of snowball and keep him pressured in, dive, take turrets, whatever. And when you go for this kind of swap, one, it's rarely going to have very much on to Darshan, because even if you don't get it right away, he's going to go flip to the bot side and defend the turret. So there's rarely an instance where a lot of this gold ends up on Darshan, where in this particular game, it would be best to get it on him. So maybe you say, why even swap there? Just go back bottom. You just got to dive. You should have an advantage in that bot lane.
And that swap also netted TSM a pretty free dragon. They were able to get hands on that Cloud Dragon that I actually think is going to be rather important for them to be able to not only play defensively against the likes of a Sivir composition that's rather easy to get away from, but on their own agenda, making sure that you can get yourself closer, speed yourself up with the Jhin, and trying to answer whatever CLG is trying to move around the map. You know, with Sivir, they like to out-rotate. They like to play that kind of
Dealing with the Aurelion Sol, too. We already saw the effectiveness of the Aurelion Sol roams. At least now with Cloud Drake, maybe we can match some of those roams that are put together by CLG. Now my question to you is, given the very early state of the game still, and from what you've seen so far, how does this game play out? What is the preferred strategy for, say, CLG or TSM to push forward? Are we looking for, very much CLG to run the kind of 1-3-1, keep the map spread, and use the likes of Sivir rotations and Aurelion Sol rotations to catch people out? Are we looking to group and dive turrets? What would be the suggestion here?
I think CLG needs to play fast from here. They need to keep trying to push waves into turrets and meet those waves with a dive from Aurelion Sol and Gragas, and basically make these 5-man plays and hope that the GP ult doesn't crush you during them, because I think once you get into the later portions of the game, while TSM's comp might be a little harder to play, you would argue, you do start controlling objectives really hard. And I think that's what TSM needs to do, is just wait till 25 minutes, you get some tank items, you do more damage, and then you just start controlling buffs and things like that.
And to be more specific as to playing fast, you just saw Hugo roam towards the bot side after losing that turret to the bottom lane in the 3-man push, and burn 3 flashes. You burn the flashes of Trundle, Jhin, and Rek'Sai. If you just return to the dual lane and you're able to make a 5-man play onto that, that should be enough to get a window to maybe even push a tier 2 turret with the likes of the Sivir, that it just would be so effective for them. But if they slow down, GP scales and GP wins.
All right, so here's the thing. We just had a whole large discussion about this game and its current game state.
Oh, give it to me.
I'm sorry to do this to you guys. Now, unfortunately for us as viewers, TSM have been offered a remake because of the bug, which they have accepted. So we will be remaking Champion Select for a new game with Aurelion Sol disabled now. So there's going to be some serious implications here with that champion being out for this series, but he will be disabled for the remainder of the series. We are going to take a short break while the team's ready up for that match. So stay tuned. We're restarting Game 1 between TSM and CLG. More League of Legends after the break.